Anybody be seated, please? Call your next witness.
Your Honor, this time the state was called Brian Winchester.
And Mr. Winchester's been sworn outside your presence, so you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I need you to speak up a little bit.
Good afternoon.
That microphone's not doing much, so we'll just need to speak up a little louder for us, please. All
Can
right?
you please introduce yourself to the jurors?
Brian Winchester,
And Mr. Winchester, how old are you?
48.
Mr. Winchester, do you know or did you know Mike Williams?
Yes, sir.
Prior to 2000, how did you know Mike Williams?
Mike and I went to high school together and got to know each other very well. We were very good friends. We continue to be friends all through college and all through our getting married, and we were very good friends. He was a very good friend.
Prior to 2000, were you married?
Yes, sir.
And who were you married to?
Kathy,
And how long had you known Kathy prior to 2000?
from high school.
Would you, Mike, and her all go to high school and college together?
The four of us all went to high school together. Yes, sir.
Who's the fourth?
Denise.
And what was Denise's relationship to Mike?
Denise and Mike were high school sweethearts. My wife, Kathy, and I were high school sweethearts. We all dated in high school and off and on through college, and then ended up all getting married.
And it's my understanding both that you and Kathy had a child,
Yes, sir.
little boy,
Yes, sir.
and that Mike and Denise had a little girl.
Yes, sir.
Were they roughly the same age?
Yes, sir.
At some point, did you and Denise become an item, I guess, if you will, prior to 2000?
Yes, sir.
When was that?
When did it start?
Yes, sir.
The date that we used was October 13th, 1997, but there was a lot that led up to that point, a lot of background.
Let's talk about what led up to that point.
As I said, she married her high school sweetheart, I married my high school sweetheart, and at first things were really good, I think with all of us, but I was not a great husband, and spent a lot of time away doing hobbies and just stupid stuff, and at one point I found a note in my first wife Kathy's purse, and basically I came to realize that she had been cheating on me or was cheating on me with another friend from high school named Gavin, and it crushed me. And after that happened, I began to look outside of my marriage. I guess I had a lot of motivations, but it led me to eventually end up with Denise. We all started going out a lot.
Let me stop you right there. We all being whom?
My wife and I, Kathy and Denise and Mike, we started going out to bars and concerts and drinking and doing a lot of things that we didn't really do while we were all in college, when probably it's more appropriate to do those sorts of things. But we started going out, a lot of drinking, and I remember one night in particular, there were several nights that we did this, but one night in particular we started talking about sex a lot.
Who's we?
The four of us. And I I was friends with Denise in middle school and high school, but I was never attracted to her until that point. And so after we started talking about sexual things and things that married couples shouldn't be talking about with each other, I think that's when the spark kind of started between the two of us.
So let's go to October 13th, 1997. You said that's the date that you used as an anniversary or something?
Yes, sir. We were going out, like I said, going out a lot, and one night in particular, we were going to Floyd's, and so Denise and I, we pulled up on Tennessee Street, and Denise and I jumped out of the car and left Mike and Kathy to go park the car, and went down to the entrance of Floyd's, and that was the first place that we kissed each other and made out, and we had our night out, and then after we all went home to our separate houses.
Let me stop you right there. You and Denise made out that night, but Mike and Kathy were present?
They were in the car. They were parking the car. It was while they were gone parking the car. And
Who
so
was there that night?
just the four of us.
Was Lindsay Lockhart there?
Not that night.
Okay. What about Angela Stafford?
Not that night. Not that night was just the four of us.
Okay.
And so later that night, after Kathy and I went home and Mike and Denise went home, she and I got on the phone together, and we basically spent the whole night talking to each other on the phone, and it was just like, I don't know, we connected like nobody else. I mean, we just really connected, and we had a lot of sexual talk and had phone sex and that sort of thing, and we agreed and then met up the next day. I think we just met during her lunch break at work, and that's kind of what just started the whole ball rolling with her and I.
Was this a one-time occurrence, or was it ongoing?
Was what a one time?
You and her having sexual relations?
Oh, no. That's just what started it. I mean, then it snowballed really fast. We started meeting in hotels. We started meeting during the workday. We started meeting whenever we had the opportunity. If Mike was at work, Mike worked a lot. He really was a workaholic, quite frankly. She was not happy with that. So we started meeting very regularly and having sex very regularly. Eventually we started going on trips together. There was times when she and Mike would go on trips, and I would go and meet with her, like if he had a conference in Panama City. I went over, and while he was in the conference, Denise and I went to Destin together, and we took trips to New York, South Beach. We spent a lot of time together.
What about Orlando? Is that one of the places you went as well?
Orlando, I remember going to Orlando with Kathy. I don't remember if Denise and I went to Orlando, just the two of us, or not. Probably. We went lots of places. Panama City.
During that time period, you mentioned you'd go to hotels.
Yes, sir.
You meet up during the day.
Yes, sir.
Were you ever at your house?
Yes, sir.
What about her house?
We would primarily go to her house, and it was primarily during the work day. We would meet at Home Depot parking lot, or meet behind Kaiser College, and leave a vehicle and go to her house or go to my house. Sometimes not go to either one of our houses, depending on how long she could be away from work.
Where was her house located at?
Her house was off Meridian on Starmount, 256 Starmount, I believe.
Did you ever park at a Grace Lutheran Church as one of the locations to drop your car off?
There was a church in the woods off of Meridian, and I would park at that church, and there was a drainage ditch that ran from the church through the woods into her neighborhood, and I would walk down the drainage ditch, and then there was only a short distance that I would have to walk from the drainage ditch down Starmount to get to her house to kind of be undercover, I guess. But there was a church on Meridian, on Miccosukee. I don't know why we parked at churches a lot, but I guess empty parking lots. But there was a church off of Miccosukee Road that I would leave my car at occasionally after they moved to Miccosukee Road to Midyet as well.
Okay, when was that?
Well, I mean, it wasn't.
They moved to the Miccosukee Road.
When did they move there? I don't remember exactly. I would say about a year and a half prior to Mike's death, if I had to guess.
And we asked questions earlier about Lindsay Lockhart. Who is that?
Lindsay Ketchum.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
formerly Miss Ketchum.
Right. She was primarily a friend of Mike's that Mike worked for the Ketchums, and Lindsay's the Ketchum's daughter.
What about Angela Stafford?
Angela worked with the Ketchums as well and was good friends with Mike and us, but primarily with Mike because she worked with Mike.
At some point, did you and Miss Stafford also have some sort of relations? When you say relationship, yes, sir. I believe it was my birthday. It was either my birthday or Angela's birthday on one occasion. And we wanted to go out, the three of us, Denise and I and Angela, wanted to go out. And for some reason, Denise couldn't go out. I don't know if she couldn't get a babysitter or what happened, but she said, no, you go on. And I was like, no, you don't want me to go out with her without you. And she's like, no, it'll be fine. And so Angela and I went out and had a lot to drink and ended up back at my house in Killarn Lakes, and ended up in bed together. And it was dark, and all of a sudden the light came on in my bedroom, and I looked up, and Denise was standing there, and she said something sarcastic and said, "I'm sorry," or something, and ran out. And I didn't want Angela to know it was Denise. I think she did know, but I didn't want her to know. And so I lied to Angela and told her that I thought it was my wife, my ex-wife at that point, Kathy. So this is after Mike's death?
Yes, sir.
But is it before you and Denise had announced that y'all were dating each other?
Correct. We were hiding it at that point.
Let's talk about life insurance policies. What is it that you did for a living back in 2000?
Part of my job was to sell life insurance.
Okay. Did you sell life insurance policy to Mike Williams?
Yes, sir. I sold him 2 different policies. I sold him one policy early on.
Say early on, when are we talking?
He may have even, well, no, we wouldn't have been in college. It would have been right after we graduated from college, so
Which is when?
93, 94, somewhere in there. Pretty early on, because I think at first he had his mother as a beneficiary, and that was a $250,000 policy. And that was before he was married to Denise. Eventually, after they got married, he changed the beneficiary on that policy to Denise. And then, you want me to talk about all that I know about his policies, whether I sold them or not? Or
Let's talk about the $1 million policy.
okay. So that was the first policy that I sold him. And then was it after Ansley was born? I believe it was after Ansley was born. Yeah, it was after Ansley was born. He and I talked about increasing his coverage.
Now, whose idea was that?
To increase it?
Or was it a mutual idea?
I mean, it was a combination of Denise and I talking about him having more coverage, and he and I talking about him having more coverage. I mean, there was a lot of conversations behind the scenes as to getting that new policy.
In all honesty, having a larger policy of $1 million on a man who's married, kids, making income isn't necessarily abnormal.
It's not, it wasn't extravagant based on the income that he was making.
But nonetheless, there was conversations, and he elected to have $1 million policy. Correct?
Right, he wasn't real, I think to him it was a lot of money. I think he even had conversations with Mr. Ketchum about it. But he, he eventually decided, and I think with Denise's encouragement, decided to go ahead and get that extra $1 million policy.
And when was that?
When did he get the policy?
Yes, sir.
I get a little confused because he had one policy that was issued that actually we didn't get the premium paid or something, so he actually had a second policy, same thing, same company, same everything. I think there was only like a 3-month gap in between that, but it was within I think 6 months to a year before his death occurred.
You mentioned another policy.
Let's go sidebar for just a second. We don't need the court report. We're dealing with a technical problem, folks. I don't know why I didn't think of this earlier, but this microphone doesn't appear to be working, but I think my microphone is working. I rarely need a microphone anyway, so we'll see if that is working.
Hello? Hello? Is this working better?
Is that not doing it?
I don't hear any difference.
May I just,
What?
may I have a?
Yeah. It's on.
Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't know that helped anybody. I thought maybe that would solve the issue. Go ahead, Mr. Hughes.
Thank you, Arthur. At some point, were you aware of him having another policy in the neighborhood of $500,000?
Yes, sir. He had another policy with a different company that he bought from a different person. I don't remember when I first became aware of it, but I know I became aware of it when I would have been talking with him about the $1 million policy. And his thoughts or intentions were that he was going to drop that $500,000 policy and replace it with the $1 million policy.
Well, let's fast forward to the year 2000. At some point, were there thoughts of how you and Denise could be together?
Yes, sir.
How did that get initiated?
I think it even started prior to that. As I've thought about this and had plenty of time alone to think about it, one thing that I have remembered is the prior year Mike and I were on a hunting trip together, and it was at a lake that was dry, and we had to walk across the mud, and there were places in the mud where I don't know how to describe it, but basically you could fall through the mud and there was nothing underneath. It was basically, I guess people would call it like quicksand. Mike fell into one of those mud holes at one time, and it was just he and I out there. And I helped him out of it, and he had dropped his gun in there as well, and he ended up going back in it after his gun. Anyways, I remember telling Denise about that and how if I hadn't have been there or if I hadn't have helped him out, that it's very likely he would have disappeared and nobody would have known what happened to him. But that's just something that I had remembered in the past few months and thinking about this. But I think it was gradual that the more we were together, the more we wanted to be together. And the more we griped about Kathy and Mike, the more we wanted to be together. It just it just got worse and worse. I mean, it just snowballed. I don't even know how to describe it, but so yes, we eventually started talking about options and ways that we could be together. And Denise, because of the way she was raised, because of her pride, I guess I can't say all the reasons, but she did not want to get divorced, and stated that she would not get divorced, but she still had a desire for us to be together, which narrowed the options even further, I guess.
Who narrowed those options?
I'm sorry?
Who narrowed those options?
It was all of our conversations and planning and everything. I would say is very mutual. I'm not going to sit here and say that Denise planned everything and I was just a dumb guy who went along with what she wanted to do. I mean, I instigated a lot of it. I helped come up with ideas. I planned a lot of things. But overall, it was very mutual. I mean, we wanted to be together. And we weren't going to let anything stop that. So over the year prior to Mike's death, we discussed several options and alternatives of ways that we could be together.
What was one option?
One of the options, Mike worked a lot at night up at his office, and one of the options was that we could make it look as if there was a burglary of some sort up at his office, and that he got shot in some type of robbery or something up at his office. Denise didn't like that idea. I didn't like that idea, and Denise didn't like that idea, but primarily because there would be an investigation if something like that occurred. So another idea, we all used to go out on boats a lot, and Mike had a boat, and another option was that the four of us would go out on a boat out into the Gulf.
The four of you being whom?
Me and Kathy and Denise and Mike. And we'd go out in a boat on the Gulf, and basically that Kathy and Mike would be pushed overboard, and that Denise and I would find a buoy way offshore that we could hold on to and either let the boat sink or let the boat take off on its own or whatever, and make it look like we had an accident on the water, and that Denise and I had survived the accident.
Obviously, didn't happen.
Correct.
At some point, did the discussion turn to strictly Mike being the one that dies?
I had no desire whatsoever for anything to happen to Kathy. I didn't really emphasize that with Denise because it was not good for me to express affection or, care about what happened to Kathy with Denise. But silently to myself, I was never going to allow anything to happen to my son's mom. So another scenario that we came up with was Mike and I going on a hunting trip together, and there being an accident where both he and I ended up in the water, and he drowned and I did not. Denise liked this idea because I don't know how to word it exactly, but she felt better, I guess, about herself, or we could feel better about ourselves if there was a chance that he could make it out of it. I think there was even talk about, well, it'll be up to God what happens and not us. It won't be a murder. It'll be, an accident. It's kind of screwed up thinking, but that was a scenario that she could live with, I guess.
Would it be fair to say that having the attention of being a widow was far better in her mind than being a divorcee?
Yes, sir. Better to be a rich widow than a poor divorcee. And her biggest concern with divorce was she didn't want to share custody of Ansley with Mike. She was not going to have Ansley going back and forth to two different houses. She wasn't going to give that up.
The drowning scenario, did you take any further steps to make that happen?
Like, what do you mean take any steps to make that happen? Like what happened?
Did you try and do that?
Yes, sir. So there was a limited time that we could make that scenario occur because it had to be during the duck season. There's only certain days that you can actually go hunting in duck season. And it had to be at a place where, in my opinion, it would have been successful, which kind of ruled out all of the local lakes around Tallahassee because the lakes around Tallahassee are mostly shallow. Lake Seminole is a lot deeper.
Let me ask another question. You talked about the life insurance policies and the $500 lapsing. Did that also factor in the equation?
Yes, sir. There were a lot of things that were kind of pressuring us for this to happen when it did. One was Mike had intended for that policy, the $500,000 policy, to lapse. He was not intending to continue it. And so behind his back, Denise paid one more. I can't remember if it was quarterly or semi-annual premium, but we kept it going one more premium period. And we knew we weren't going to be able to keep it going perpetually, that he would eventually see this money, hey, it's going out of the checking account for that policy that I didn't want anymore. So there was that. He was becoming a couple of things. He was getting angrier and angrier about the fact that she wasn't having sex with him. He and I took a trip in November out to Arkansas together. So we spent 20 hours in the car together, and I heard a lot about how unhappy he was, with Denise. And he was not happy with not having sex. Of course, I didn't want him having sex with her. She didn't want to have sex with him, but so he even talked about moving away. He talked about moving out west. He talked about all kind of, things, but he was becoming very unhappy, and he was also becoming suspicious. He raised his suspicions with me, not about me, but about Denise on that trip to Arkansas. that he thought something was going on with her. He thought she was using drugs. He thought he had seen money disappearing. She'd been taking cash withdrawals out of the ATM, which I knew was for travel for us when we would go out of town. But he kind of thought it might be for drugs or something. I think he even approached Denise's mom about it at some point, asking her about it. But so also their anniversary was coming up in December, and
What was their anniversary date?
the 16th or the 17th, I believe. 16th, I believe it was. And he planned for them to go to Apalachicola and stay at the Gibson Inn over there. And I think made it pretty clear that he was ready. You know, Denise didn't have sex with him while she was pregnant and after Ainsley was born. You know, to my knowledge, at all, unless she lied to me about it, which she could have. But you know, based on what Mike said, he kind of confirmed that. And we checked up on each other a lot. Denise would check up to see if I was having sex with Kathy, and I would check up on her to see if she was having sex with Mike, because we considered ourselves a couple together. Anyway, so I think Mike made it pretty clear that this anniversary trip, it was going to be expected that this was, you know, going to be their starting over date, that it had been long enough since Ainsley had been born that it was time for them to start having sex again. I think he was kind of putting some pressure on Denise about that, and she did not want to go on that trip, did not want that trip to happen.
Okay. So was a plan made? Y'all take steps to kill Mike?
Yes, sir. So, you know, we decided that was the plan that we were going to go with.
Well, let me ask you a question. You earlier talked about time of the essence because of duck season. Why is it important for the duck season aspect of this?
Well, because that was the plan, was he and I to be on a duck hunting trip together and to go to Lake Seminole. So duck season only lasted from Thanksgiving until the end of January. It may have even been shorter back in those days, but there was a short time frame that the season was in. And then within that season, you know, we couldn't necessarily go every single day. You had to, in some places, you can only hunt on Wednesdays and on the weekends, Saturday, Sundays. So we knew our window of opportunity was closing, basically. So it was decided that was the plan we were going to go with. And there were several things involved. Denise really didn't have to do a whole lot other than come up with an alibi for herself and make sure that Mike went. I had to do, you know, more, obviously. But it was decided that Mike and I would go on this trip. I had to, you know, I wanted to make sure he was going to show up. So, you know, there was a week prior that this was planned, and then that it didn't occur before the actual time that it did occur.
Let's talk about that. The week prior it was supposed to occur?
Yes, sir. So a week prior, we had it set up that this was going to be the date that the trip was going to occur. So Mike and I planned to go, you know, on the trip, and then late the night before, I believe it was before midnight, and I believe Mike was at his office, and he called me and he said, I can't go. Denise has called me. She doesn't want me to go on the trip. And I was very surprised, shocked, kind of. And I was like, okay. And because we had, you know, made all this plans for this to happen. And so I can't remember when I called Denise. I think I called her immediately after I hung up with Mike, just to see, you know, what is going on. I mean, because this isn't something you need to be wishy-washy about. And I can't remember if I talked to her that night or if it was the next day, but we talked very shortly afterward. And basically it was just a cold feet kind of thing. And she, got cold feet at the last minute. So
At
we.
that point, were the plans off? What was going to happen?
It wasn't that the plan was off, but we talked about it, and we had several, more conversations that, look, this is either we're going to go forward with this or we're not. I mean, we're either going to be together or we're not. Like I said, the policy is ending. You got that anniversary trip coming up next weekend. Duck season is going to be ending soon. Do you want this to happen or not? I don't want to set these plans up if this isn't something, this isn't something you need to be wishy-washy about, I guess, basically. So at some point during the next week, it was decided again that, yes, this was what we were going to do.
Doctor, right there, you're talking about, you're telling her, can't be wishy-washy, times are ending, we have a certain time frame, we have to do this. And then it almost sounds like you were pressuring her to that. Would that?
Pressuring her. I don't think it was pressuring her as much as stating the facts of this is the reality of the situation. If you want this to happen, this is the best time for it to happen.
Were all of those issues things that you...
I was not happy, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was not happy about the fact that we had made these plans and I had committed that this was what was going to happen, and then at the last second she backed out. I didn't understand that and wasn't real happy about that, but...
Were all those issues that you just talked about things that you previously discussed with her?
Yes.
The time frames and everything like that?
Right.
So you call her up and you tell her all these things, this not be wishy-washy. Were there other communications where she was talking to you about putting the plans back in place?
Right, yeah, well, we met up eventually and probably met up several times that week. At that point, we were meeting, a lot. And so we met, I'm sorry?
When you talk about met up, like going out to eat, or what are you talking about?
No, the same as we always did, meeting during the workday, primarily during lunches, that sort of thing. So we...
You're talking about sexual relations?
Well, we didn't always had sex every time, but during that week, a primary reason we were meeting was to discuss what are we going to do here, what's going to happen here. So we met up during that week and talked about it and came to the conclusion again. And I remember where it was. It was at Roden Cove, at the boat ramp at Roden Cove.
Where's that?
On Lake Jackson off of Meridian Road, at the end of Roden Cove Road. But we decided that this is what we were going to do. We're not going to back out at the last minute. And in a sick sort of way, it was kind of like, well, if God wants this to happen, this is what's going to happen, because the plan again was that it was going to be an accident and, there would be a chance that he could get out of it.
You say you met up. Why meet up rather than phone calls or something like that? Any particular reason?
Well, that's not necessarily something you really want to talk about on the phone. We weren't really that concerned or paranoid about that sort of thing at that point. But we just met up routinely because we wanted to meet each other, because we wanted to see each other and be together.
All right, so then at that time you meet up at the Cove and make a decision.
Yes, sir.
So what's supposed to happen?
So it's the same plan. It's same night, just a week later. And from what I remember about that night before, Mike had volunteered to ring the bell for the Salvation Army at like a Walmart. And Kathy and I had planned on going out to a concert at Floyd's, and I wanted us all to go out, as I remember it, but that didn't end up happening for whatever reason. I don't know if they couldn't get a babysitter or why they didn't end up going out with us, but Kathy and I did end up going out to that concert. Part of the plan was that I wanted Kathy to basically be as drunk as possible the night before, because I wanted her to sleep late the next morning. My alibi, the plan was that all of this would occur very early in the morning, and I would have time enough to get back and meet my father-in-law up near I-10 and Thomasville Road to actually go on a hunting trip with him. So that was going to be my cover, going to be my alibi. Her alibi was going to be that she was at home with Ansley, and the plan was, when Mike didn't come back home, that eventually she was going to start calling her sisters and her dad from her house phone so that she could establish that she was at the house, prove that she was at the house with Ansley.
Okay, so what was the plan to make this happen? What happened?
So Kathy and I went out and went to the concert, got home late. She did have a lot to drink. There was discussion between me and Denise, and I can't remember if I actually did this or not, or if I did it the week prior, or I just really can't remember. But I remember Denise and I talking about there was some medication. There was some medication that Kathy had, and we talked about giving her a little bit of that medication that would cause her to sleep really heavy, and make sure that she slept really good through all of it, because I didn't want her to wake up and realize how early. I didn't want her to know how early I was leaving the next morning. So the plan with Mike was that I would meet him at a gas station on Thomasville Road up near the overpass. Well, the overpass I don't think was there at that point, but meet him up at a gas station up near the McDonald's up there. And I met him there. I had told him that we were going to go to a secret special spot to go hunting, and that he needed to bring his waders. I had to make sure that he brought his waders, because the belief was, there was kind of like there still is probably like a duck hunter's myth that if you fall overboard with your waders, you're going to sink really quick and drown. So I had to make sure that he brought his waders. And so I told him about this, great spot that we were going to go, and he needed to bring his waders. So I met him at the gas station, and I told him when he drove up, I was real paranoid about phones and him calling me and there being a record of him calling me. So I told him that my battery was dead on my phone, that there was no reason for him to call me as we were driving over to the lake, because normally we would have called and talked to each other on the phone, or even ridden together. I don't even remember how or why I told him that I needed to use my vehicle instead of just going in his, but somehow I came up with some reason to do that.
Stop you right there real quick. You said that you called him and tried to get him and make sure he was going to get the waders. When did you call him and talked about that?
I don't remember specifically. We talked several times. Mike and I talked every day ourselves. So, we talked about hunting all the time, and we talked about this trip several times prior to it happening.
Okay.
So I followed him over to the lake. He had his boat behind his Bronco, and I followed him in my white Suburban.
What lake?
Lake Seminole, which is about 50 minutes away. And I had told him what landing we needed to go to, and so we pulled into the landing and launched the boat. And I said something. I had to make sure that he had the waders on, so I said something about we're running low on time, or we're going to be really pushed. And
Why was it so important for the waders to be on?
because I believed and we believed that if you fell overboard with the waders on, that you would sink pretty quickly. So I told him something like, we're running late, we need to go ahead and put our waders on, here and now, before we get in and go. And so we both did that. And because I knew where we were going hunting, I was in the back of the boat driving, and he was in the front.
Talking about a boat. What kind of boat are we talking about? We're talking about like a large airboat, or what are we talking about?
It was a what's called a canoe. It's basically a canoe that has a flat back that you can put a small motor on the back of it.
I'm familiar with canoes. Canoes can be a little tipsy.
This
You guys do
boat,
the same way?
this boat was, yes, basically like a canoe, so pretty tippy.
Okay. So you put the boat in the water and you're heading out and you're driving?
Yes, sir. I was driving, and I know I was very concerned about the time. Everything had taken longer than what I had anticipated, and I had to be back in town early enough in time to meet my father-in-law for my alibi trip to occur. And so we headed out, and there was a deep area, maybe a couple hundred yards from the landing that we put in at. And we got to that area that I knew was a deep area, and I don't remember exactly how I got him to stand up, but I don't know if I pretended something was wrong with the motor or the weight in the boat was off or something, but I basically stopped the boat and got him to stand up, and when he did, I pushed him into the water.
What happened next?
So he was in the water, and he was like struggling, and the motor of the boat was still running, and I pulled off just a little bit to get kind of away from him so that he couldn't reach back into the boat. And I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know if he was trying to swim, or I didn't know what was going on, but what I came to find out, or eventually realized, was he was taking the waders and the jacket off. And he got those off, and I think I forgot to tell you about this part before, but I remember now that area of the lake had a lot of snags, a lot of dead trees that come up out of the water, and there's a lot of stumps that come up out of the water. And he swam over to one of those stumps and held on to it. And he was panicking, and I was panicking, and none of this was like going well. I thought it was going to go. And I didn't know what to do. But he started to yell. And I didn't know how to get out of that situation. And so I had my gun in the boat. And so I loaded my gun, and I just I made 1 or 2 circles around, and I ended up circling closer towards him, and he was in the water. And as I passed by, I shot him.
Where did you shoot him?
In the head.
What happened next?
So when I shot him, it was dark, and there was a bright flash when that happened, and I didn't want to see what happened, so I closed my eyes when the instant of that flash happened, and the boat was moving as this happened, and so I turned back around and came back to where he was, and got to the stump, and I knew I couldn't leave him there being shot, so I was going to have to do something to cover this up. And I reached down, and he wasn't far under the water, but like my whole arm got wet. And I remember wondering, how am I going to explain that my arm is soaking wet? And I was afraid I was going to have to jump into the water. But I reached down, and I grabbed a hold of him. And I was closer, because of where I had driven the boat, I was closer to another landing, just a little dirt landing that was further down the shoreline. And so I decided to motor the boat and pull him over to that landing over there. So I dragged him in the water over to that dirt ramp and left the boat, left him, ran back down to where our trucks were parked, got my truck, came back to where he was, backed my truck to the edge of the water, and let the tailgate down, and ended up putting him in the back of my Suburban, and I pushed the boat back out into the water to make it look like, his boat was out there and he had drowned or disappeared or what. I didn't give a lot of thought as to what was going to happen after that. I was just panicked as to getting out of that area and covering this up. So I realized it was probably getting too late at this point to meet up with my father-in-law, but I was still going to try. And I sped.
Winchester, let me stop you for a moment. You said that you were able to you loaded him into your Suburban.
Yes, sir.
How big was Mike?
He was a little bit bigger than me. He was a little heavier than me. We were pretty close in size, but he was a little bit bigger than me.
How much do you weigh?
Back then, probably 170, something like that.
How were you able to get a man that's 175 pounds, dead weight, into the back of your Suburban by yourself?
It was not easy, and it was not pretty. But I had to make it happen. I mean, I had no choice. And I can't even explain how your body feels in that kind of a situation. I don't unless somebody's been to war or something. I don't even know how to explain. But you have so much adrenaline pumping through your body, it's just crazy. But it wasn't pretty, and I made a purposeful decision to never view him, to look at him. But I backed the truck down, and there was an angle to the ramp. So the back of my truck was angled down toward the water, and I backed it all the way down to the edge of the water. So there was no distance involved. But yes, he was very heavy, and it was not easy to do that, but I had no choice.
You said you were concerned about meeting up with your father-in-law at that point. What happened next?
I sped back toward Tallahassee, and as I was driving there, I was realizing I'm not going to make it in time. I didn't want to call him because I didn't want to turn my phone on. I didn't want there to be any record of where my phone was at. So I left my phone off. And by the time I got back to Tallahassee, I looked through the parking lot. We were going to meet at Carriage Gate parking lot. I looked through the parking lot, didn't see his vehicle there. And I decided the best thing for me to do was to go back to my house and pretend that I had overslept. And then I could also make a phone call from my house to my father-in-law, which would kind of prove that I overslept and I was at my house. And I wanted there to be a record of that.
And all this is with Mike in the back of your Suburban?
Yes, sir. I actually, when I was driving on Thomasville Road, I actually came up to a stoplight and there was a state trooper across from me. And I can remember just being freaked out about it. But I didn't have any choice, so that's what I decided to do. So I drove home, pulled up into my driveway, and was really, really hoping that Kathy was still asleep. I went into the house as quietly as I could. She was still asleep. I crawled back into the bed and had a phone there on the floor. I can remember dialing my father-in-law and telling him, apologizing, I'm so sorry, I overslept. And I didn't want to wake Kathy up, obviously, because I had what was in the driveway, but I wanted her to know I was there. So I can't remember what I said to her, but I think I halfway woke her up and said, I'm going to go out with the dogs or train dogs. I trained dogs at the time and was gone for hours at a time from the house doing stuff like that. But I don't remember exactly what I told her, but I wanted her to know that I was there, to confirm that I was there, but not wake up and start asking me any questions about what happened, why'd you oversleep, anything like that. So I did that. And then I went back out to the driveway to leave. When I went out to the driveway, my driveway was angled, and I was walking behind my truck, and I saw out of the back tailgate, blood was coming out of the back of my tailgate and dripping onto the driveway. And that freaked me out. So I rinsed that off and was trying to figure out. I'd been thinking on the way from Lake Seminole back to Tallahassee, what was I going to do with him? And I don't know when I decided, but ultimately I decided it had to be close and it had to be quick, and it had to be obviously a location that he wouldn't be found. And I decided on an isolated dirt road boat ramp down at Carr Lake. But I had no tools, and at that point Carr Lake was very low. Parts of it were dry, and like the other lakes, there were areas in the lake that had puddles of water or mud. And my thinking was, if I got him there, I could take him out to one of those water holes or mud holes and put him in one of those, and that would be a safe place that he wouldn't be found. But I had nothing to do this with, so I had to go to a store. and I'm 90% sure the store that I ended up at was Walmart. And I bought a shovel, I bought a tarp, and I bought weights, like weights that you lift weights with, because I was thinking that I would use the weights to weigh his body down in the water or a mud hole or whatever. While I was in that store, I actually ran into a friend of ours, Mike Phillips, and I actually totally forgot about running into him or having any conversation with him until I ran into him later during the search for Mike Williams at the lake. And he said, "Yeah, I remember seeing you that day. You were in a panic. You were in a hurry." And he was thinking I was in a hurry to go search for Mike, but I was actually in a hurry because I was trying to bury Mike. Anyways, I bought those things at the Walmart and drove to Car Lake down to the end of the road, turned my truck around backwards, backed down to the landing, and my thinking was I was going to drag him way out into the lake, and so I got the tarp and put it on the ground behind my truck, pulled Mike out, put him on that tarp, kind of wrapped him up, and as I pulled him, instantly I knew there was no way I was going to be able to move him any distance at all. That he was just too heavy, and that wasn't going to happen. So I had to find somewhere close, and it was a really grown-up area, and like I said, the lake was almost dry, so the water was down, and I decided to put him down in the lake bed itself, kind of on the edge of the lake, so that eventually when the water came back up, that area would be underwater. And it was hidden from the road somewhat. So I pulled him down to that area and started digging a hole. It was hard. I was exhausted. I was getting bitten by ants all over me. I remember being scared that I was going to have to explain why I had ant bites all over me because there was ants where I was digging. Actually, while I was doing this, I heard a vehicle coming down the road, and so there were bushes there anyway, but I kind of made sure everything was flat and you couldn't see it from the road, and I ran back up to my truck, and a guy drove up. He was coming down there to go hunting out on the lake itself, and he and I made small talk, chit-chat. I was obviously very paranoid, and I got the impression, I can't remember why now, but at the time I got the impression that he might have been like a law enforcement type guy, maybe like a game warden or something like that. But he talked about he was going deer hunting out on the lake bed, and so I kind of hung out at my truck and waited for him to get several hundred yards away before I went back to digging. So eventually I got a hole big enough, and I put him there and covered him up, and made sure it didn't look suspicious as well as I could. But now I still had a problem because my truck had blood all in the back of it, and it was getting later and later in the day, and I knew at some point people were going to start calling me. There was a family Christmas with my wife's family up in Cairo that we were supposed to be going to that afternoon or that night. I was just running out of time, and so I put the shovel in the back of the truck, and I knew I had to clean my truck up. And I think at that point, I can't remember the order. I can't remember. I went two different places. I went two different places to clean up my truck. One of them was I went to my parents' house and parked. They have a big lot, and I parked toward the back of it and tried to use a hose to clean out the truck. And I think I went there first because it was closer to where I was, but it wasn't working very well. And I realized I needed to have like a pressure washer. And so I left there and drove around trying to find a car wash that had a pressure washer, and there were none on my side of town. So I ended up at Tharp Street in Old Bainbridge. There's a car wash there that had pressure washers. And I cleaned out the back as best as I could there. And after that...
Let's stop for a second.
Yes, sir.
Buried him in the car lake. At some point, do you, for lack of a better term, go about your business, go to Cairo, meet Kathy and everybody in the family?
Right. After I cleaned up, I'm sorry.
Did you go up to Cairo, meet Kathy and the family?
Yes.
Okay. At some point, were you contacted about Mike being gone, missing?
Right.
Who contacted you?
My recollection is that my dad called me and said, Mike's missing.
Whenever that happened, what'd you do? And let me back up. When was that?
I remember it being on the drive home from being up at Cairo for the Christmas party.
So was this the same Saturday?
Yes, sir.
Okay, in the evening hours?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What'd you do?
When my dad called, I kind of said, well, that's Mike, because Mike was known to be late and kind of irresponsible at times, going out on hunting or fishing trips or whatever. I said, I'll get back there and we'll, go look for him. And so got back to town, met up with my dad, and went with him over to Lake Seminole.
That night or next day?
That immediately when I got back to town.
Okay.
There were a few people over there with boats, mainly friends and family, and those of us with boats started going out where his truck was. No, we didn't put in where his truck was. We put it in, there was a concrete landing before that, which was a nicer landing that you weren't going to get stuck at. And my dad and I went out on the lake and searched for Mike. He was searching and I was just lying.
My understanding, a weather front came through and it rained during that evening.
There was a storm that came through that night. I think we got off the lake before that happened, but my dad wanted to look at it. I think we were the last ones on the lake, and my dad didn't want to give up. My dad loved Mike.
That would be a good time to take a break. Why don't we take 10 minutes?
Okay.